Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Good morning to you. I'm taking a brief break from impeachment news and Wuhan coronavirus updates to talk with my guest, Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, to talk with him about a couple subjects before returning to our typical strategery. Good morning, Admiral.
Good morning, Hugh.
I am curious. I think the decision to name the next American aircraft carrier for Dorie Miller, Navy Cross recipient, African American enlisted man who was serving aboard the West Virginia on the day of December 7th, is a grand idea. What do you think of it?
It's 100% a grand idea, and I'll give you three quick reasons. One is Dorie Miller himself, who comes from a very hard scrabble background. He's the original boy named Sue. You know, his name is Doris
Yes.
because his family wanted a girl and thought he was going to be a girl. He turns out to be a big, strong guy, but he's got to kind of push back on all that. He becomes an expert boxer. Did you know that he was a
No,
boxing champion of the Pacific Fleet? Yeah,
I did not.
and
Huh.
yeah. So just him as overcoming a lot of challenges in his life. It's very inspirational. Number two, the obvious thing is the Medal of Honor piece of this, where he is a Navy steward, which means his job is basically to be a cook, to wash and clean uniforms, to shine shoes for the officers. Yet when the attack happens, without any technical knowledge, he jumps on an anti-aircraft gun, probably shoots down a Japanese Zero, and just inspires the crew around him. So an extraordinary, should have been a Medal of Honor, but in those days, the highest he was going to get as an African American, Navy Cross, an amazing single act of courage. And then third and finally, it's the inspiration of the Navy overcoming its institutional racism, let's be honest, in the pre-World War era. Now he's going to be a Navy nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. I'll close by saying a nuclear aircraft carrier, and you know this, is 7 acres of sovereign territory on that flight deck. It goes where it wants on the high seas. It's the ultimate instrument of American power. I'm really proud of my Navy for this one.
Acting Secretary Moodley announced this at the Arizona on Martin Luther King Day, although word had leaked a little bit earlier than that. And I think it's terrific. I think it's grand. I also wonder whether it breaks the precedent of presidents being named, carriers being named for presidents going forward. What do you think, Admiral?
I think it won't completely break that apart. And if you look at our carriers today, the majority are named for American presidents: Washington, Lincoln, Truman, Ford, Reagan, etc.
Roosevelt.
Roosevelt. We've always had carriers that were also named for famous battles. Some historically carry the names back to the 6 original American frigates, so Constitution, Enterprise, etc. So I think there'll be one or two that reach out and say something very special beyond presidents. I do think it's a pretty good tradition to name those carriers after presidents. But in this case, Dorie Miller just really felt good, I think, across the entire spectrum for everybody.
Now, let me turn to another thing the acting secretary did, which was to convene an offsite meeting in Annapolis a week ago. And they came away committed publicly to 355 ships. And then the CNO went out and he laid out the budget, the top line that they need to get to that, which I've been arguing for 3 years. What did you make of that exercise and that proposed budget, which requires, if we are serious about this, a significant top line increase in spending for the Navy?
Let me start with Acting Secretary Moodley, who I've known for years and has been just a quiet, steady, smart force inside the Navy, not only on the issue that we're discussing this morning, the top line and the number of ships, but also on educating the Navy, on creating a strategy for the Navy. And in the brief period he's been the acting secretary, he's published a whole series of new vectors for the Navy. And I'm extremely impressed with what he's doing generally. Let's add to that brand new CNO, Admiral Mike Gilday, who is one of the most cerebral officers we've had in that position, steady and smart and very clear-eyed. He is the embodiment of Colin Powell's old line that you can get anything done in Washington if you're willing not to get credit for it. He's not about himself. So when you put those two together, a lot of brain power, a lot of low-key leadership, I feel very good about where this is going to go. And indeed, the 355 number is crucial. I think you can debate whether or not you ought to be able to count some type of high-tech unmanned ship in that or not. But I think that tracks are being laid down. The key, Hugh, is going to be building the ships, but also putting enough funding into the budget to maintain them, the so-called readiness question. So that's where you have it. You have Mosley pushing the ship numbers and the top line, and C&O Gilday on the maintenance and the readiness side. That's a very good combination for the Navy right now.
Now, I want to switch over to the fact we're a few days out from the back and forth with Iran, which began with their attack on our base, killing an American contractor and wounding some soldiers, followed by our strike on Hezbollah Iraq division, killing 24 of their warriors, followed by their attack on our embassy, followed by our killing of Soleimani, followed by their volleys of ballistic missiles at Al-Assad Air Force Base. What do you think? Where are we right now with the Islamic Republic of Iran as you judge it, Admiral? And what are you expecting over the next few days, weeks, months?
We are right back where we were before the sequence you described, with one important and positive difference, and that is the removal of General Soleimani. He was highly capable, very crafty, very inspirational within the Islamic Republic of Iran. And now that chess piece is off the board. So we're right back where we were, but the Iranians are wounded by the loss of Soleimani. And secondly, they're wounded in the court of international opinion by this tragic blunder of shooting down this Ukrainian airliner. So the Iranians are diminished. Their economy continues to bleed altitude if they were an airplane. And the onus at this point, I think, is on the Europeans. The Europeans are kind of the swing voters between the United States, which is implacably opposed to Iran, and the Iranians, who are going to continue to push around the region in all the ways that have caused us to be concerned about them. And, by the way, are, in fact, by their own announcements, are now returning to enrichment of uranium. Who's kind of in the middle there? It's the Europeans, who so far have been trying to keep pumping oxygen into this dying nuclear deal. They need to walk away from the nuclear deal, align with the United States, and I think that gives you the political pressure. And at that stage, the Iranians are going to have to wake up and drink the tea and say, okay, we're going to have to get back to the negotiating table. I kind of think that's how this plays out over the course of this year. I'll close by saying the president doesn't want to start a war here. So there will be, I think, some room for the United States to maneuver, assuming the Europeans come our way. So the administration correctly is focusing on getting the Europeans where they need to be. Then I think we can go back to Iran and say, game over. Let's get back to the negotiating table. That's how we avoid a war.
Now, Admiral, I want to close by going to the arrival in the United States of the Wuhan coronavirus. And I pray it's one case, not many cases. I hope they've called Ron Klain, President Obama's point man on Ebola. But what, from your position as a strategist, is the potential of pandemic in China? They're up to 900 cases. 9 deaths and 600 cases. It's jumped to South Korea, the United States, Japan. It's not a problem, the president said this morning to Joe Kernan. I just wonder what thoughts you have on the prospect of pandemic, which eventually will return. That's why I always bring it up. We had the Spanish flu in 1918 to 1920. It eventually will come back. What's your thought on strategic consequence of this?
There is no question we will face a pandemic globally sometime in the coming decade or so. And the evidence, Hugh, and you know this is human history, despite all the advances in medicine that have been remarkable. About every 100 to 200 years, a pandemic occurs. There's no reason to think that's going to have suddenly changed. And I'd encourage everybody to go back and just Google Spanish flu, Spanish influenza. It infected 40% of the world's population with a mortality rate of 20%. In today's numbers, that would kill near 1 billion people. So we ought to be very concerned about this. And if you look at the faces of the medical professionals, the CDC professionals, as they come on air and talk about it, they are deeply concerned, and I am too. This could be the biggest story of 2020. Let's hope not. Ebola was contained largely, although it killed thousands in East Africa. I think we can get our arms around this is the bottom line. And here's the advantage of the fact that it's coming out of China, is that it's an authoritarian country. Normally, I'm not in favor, as you know, of authoritarian countries. But if you have to have a pandemic start somewhere, go for an authoritarian country because they can ruthlessly crack down, shut down society, tell everyone to go inside, keep everybody at home, ruthlessly quarantine. So let's hope China can get its arms around it. What we need to do here is, A, be aware of the threat, B, put national resources against it immediately, and C, when we see individuals, they do need to be ruthlessly quarantined at this stage of the pandemic. So
now, Admiral, I also, very quickly, the good difference between SARS and MERS is that China is transparent this time. They were not the last time. I think that's a major advantage, isn't it?
It is. And again, what you want is to have a place of a pandemic is a capable society, China, check, an authoritarian society, China, check, and transparency where they are sharing with the world. So far, check. I think we're going to get our hands around this one, but pandemics are going to be a serious issue in this decade. Watch for that one.
I hope we're not talking about this next week, but I suspect we will be, Admiral. Thank you for joining me, as always, early in the morning. I appreciate it so much. Admiral James Stavridis. I want you now to join